The Third Side of the Coin, brought to you by Excalibur Coaching and Consulting.
Hello, and welcome to the Third Side of the Coin podcast, episode number 10, The Purpose of Leadership. My name is Alex Aberle, and I'm joined by my co-host, Tim Wong. I'm the president of Excalibur Coaching and Consulting, a leadership and career coaching firm that partners with current and aspiring leaders going through career transition and looking to find ways to build a world of better leadership. My co-host Tim Wong is a content curator focusing on thought leadership for YPO and defining learning themes for programming globally relevant top leadership learning events. He is also an international faculty of the Art of Living Foundation and the International Association of Human Values.
Hi, Alex. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you so much, Tim. So prior to us starting this episode, you and I chatted about the hardships that a lot of people around the world are just experiencing with COVID and all the restrictions. And you've mentioned something that was quite shocking to me. In the US, some people were not able to attend funerals, but it sounds like in Australia, it's still the case. And I would probably think that, this whole situation is impacting not only people who are directly affected, right, by this tragedy, but also how do people work in this case? How do you bring yourself into this whole mix, knowing that if something were to happen with your relative and you're not able to even cross the border from one state to the next? That sounds like it's devastating.
They write to the equivalent of, for us, we call them member of parliament. For you, it'd be like your congressional member, and see whether they can find an exception. So they do what they call exemptions, but the exemptions take a while. I mean, it's a bureaucratic process. So it takes a long time. And when you're talking about life and death situation, you don't have that luxury. So there's a lot of things that people don't talk about. Is before the restrictions in travel, you could just hop on a plane and then get there. But now with travel restrictions and constraints that one might have, it really just does change the entire process of closure for anyone. So there is that mental toll. And I think increasingly there is mental toll, the mental health that everyone's talking about, of working from home, the routines that we're used to of the human contact, the casualness of it is lost. Because it's sort of like the paranoia of this virus going around where we really don't know how it reacts. An interesting thing this week, I thought someone pocket dialed me.
Okay.
So I kept hanging up. And then finally they asked me where I was, and I went, oh, okay. So we had a good chat, and this person was talking about their partner, and she was worried that the partner was having thoughts about the entire family unit. The entire system is just gone. It's just not what he is used to. So I was saying, well, of course, he is a type A personality, high achiever, everything's done well, have a family, have a good job, sportsman, glamour couple, that type. And now he doesn't know what it all means anymore. What is the next journey for him? Because many of us have a sequence to our journey is very linear, if you think about it. So that expectation of being promoted to a new job or something else isn't there for him anymore. And that's freaking him out. And I think that is freaking out a lot of people, especially people in their prime, if you're talking about in their 30s or 40s, that has been in a structured system. And all of a sudden that system itself is crumbling around them. What do they do next? She was saying that he's saying all the right stuff. And I said, well, of course, everyone's going through that process. What you see in the management journals or in newspaper editorials, that more communication, checking in on people. Everyone is doing that. They're stepping the dance move according to what needs to be done. But you're stepping the dance move without the emotions attached to it. And that doesn't create the reality or the authenticity in really asking, am I really okay?
So do you think people are going through the motions, when we talk about, and let's go just attach that topic of purpose of leadership that we intended to talk about, which I think it's all really super connected here. But the reality is that we don't want to also jeopardize our future, if you will, and tell the manager, you know what, I am not okay. Not only out of fear, that's not even probably the only factor, which I do think there is a bit of hesitation to present yourself in such a way where you might appear to fallen apart because your personal circumstances not only changed drastically, but also in some cases got to the point of being in shambles. So many relationships are being torn apart because of the fact that you can't see each other, like in your situation with your partner. Do you think that we need to really be honest with each other and say, okay, open communication between the manager and somebody who works for the company is great. Absolutely. It needs to be there. We really need to pay closer attention to the mental health of an individual. And that only comes when an individual feels that everything they say is going to be confidential. That's just the reality. And it's, me speaking as a coach, as a cognitive behavior therapy practitioner, it's not about not having trust, but there's certain things you just won't say because you want to appear that you're productive. You don't want to lose any more than what you've already lost.
Yeah. Mental health itself, it has only started to get attention, I would say, in the past 12 to 18 months. It still is a very taboo subject. You cannot wear your heart on your sleeve in the business. I mean, people say be authentic. Be authentic, yes, you stand by your word, that is authenticity, which means your word is your bond, that is authenticity. But authenticity can also mean wearing your heart on your sleeve, which in business can be a death sentence. Because you need to keep it together. You can't show that level of vulnerability, right? So I think there is a difference between vulnerability and the courage to be wrong, right? That is the difference in leadership. Vulnerability in leadership, I don't want to follow a leader that's vulnerable because I don't want to fall into the cliff along with that leader.
So it really is the definition though, right? You think it's just semantics. When you say, I don't want to follow a vulnerable leader, I have to ask for clarification because sometimes it comes down to semantics.
Yes. So vulnerability means you're open to weakness.
So why is it bad?
Why is it bad? Because you need a leader that is confident, but confident with the ability to pivot and accept change, right? And the ability to know when he or she is wrong. That's not vulnerability, that's actually courage.
Okay, so I would have defined it prior to our conversation is vulnerability because you are still showing up as a leader in front of the world. I'm going to say all-encompassing world because it could be the team, it could be the society outside of work. You are coming out as your own self, which is authentic. A lot of times we are mistaking authenticity for many other definitions because ultimately we all have to play certain roles. Like with my clients, I'm a coach where I respect people's confidentiality. People can just talk to me and sometimes I have to be just a listener. Sometimes I need to be an advisor. Sometimes I need to be a consultant. When I'm a wife to my husband, I clearly able to say my role here is not to be an advisor because it will piss him off if I do advise. I used to try to do that and that's just didn't work. But it's more being a true friend, right? So authenticity in that case is not impacted or affected or changed, it's the role you taking, right? So even being vulnerable has to coincide with the role you play. So isn't it like the level of vulnerability, since we're kind of playing with the definitions here?
Yeah, I guess it's what's interesting here is probably it is semantics. I would say the use of the word vulnerability is a very American-centric thing. It's sort of like, oh, it's high EQ, let's call it vulnerability, right? And it's sort of like, is it necessary? Rather, when you talk about vulnerability, wouldn't it be better to say that you're far more broad-sided and open-minded? Vulnerability means there are weaknesses in you. And I'm saying that, yes, everyone has their weaknesses. But if a leader is vulnerable, then there is an image that he or she hasn't done their due diligence in whatever they had to do.
So, Tim, out of curiosity here.
But perhaps my expectations of leadership is very high.
And I think we all have to hold ourselves to the higher standards, because vulnerability, you're right. I think it's cultural. I think it's a cultural definition. And that's so important to understand, especially for the leaders who are tasked with inspiring and motivating, as we talked in previous podcasts, their teams to understand the cultural differences. Because if I were to, just as an example, coach somebody who is the type of person who is afraid to show their weaknesses, who is striving to always be right so they don't look silly in front of others, that might be the issue with authenticity versus vulnerability from, in one culture, where I would say, it's okay to be vulnerable and basically say, if I don't know something, it's okay. That's the reason you have people on your team who are able to perform certain tasks. So I don't know what I don't know. It's an okay statement. And I would assign that, in my mind, again, just the wording, as vulnerability.
So that's either semantic or environmental influence. So say, for example, the example you gave, there's things I don't know. And to be able to say there's things I don't know demonstrates your sense of vulnerability, right? But I would actually see that demonstrates your sense of self-awareness.
That's a good point. And I think you've mentioned before, it's not just having self-awareness, it's the level of self-awareness. Because at some point, if you have not reached a certain or higher level of self-awareness based on not just the practices of learning of who you are, which includes meditation, but it's also how experienced individuals are in the leadership roles to understand their shortcomings. So it's not about being weak. I think it's about being willing to learn about who you are, and come across as saying, hey, I am not perfect, but I am confident that whatever it is we decide doing together using our expertise, we can move on and make the best things happen. That's the confidence of the leadership to me.
I would see that, as a great leader is an individual with a high sense of self-awareness, a high sense of awareness of his environment and people he or she interacts with. At the same time, with the humility to know that decisions can be wrong or can be improved, and also that there's always a learning opportunity for growth. It's a very different approach to the common literature out there right now. If people are comfortable with using the term vulnerability, great. But I would feel a lot more supportive than if I'm able to support a leader and say to him or her, it's the level of understanding change always happens, and being able to roll with the change demonstrates your leadership skills. You can also say your level of vulnerability and how you deal with your vulnerability. It's still saying the same thing, but if the experience of it, of hearing it, then I'll rather prefer hearing that, your ability to roll with the changes.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you. Absolutely. I think the way, and hence the reason the third of the name for our conversations, the third side of the coin, it's how, everybody's perceiving their world differently. Everybody has a different map of the world based on their experiences. We're talking about, who the leader can be, should be, but it's really about the purpose of it, right? What is the purpose of leadership? And the quote that I liked to use was by Dee Hock. He was founder and CEO of Emeritus Visa. So he said, control is not leadership. Management is not leadership. Leadership is leadership. If you seek to lead, invest at least 50% of your time in leading yourself, your own purpose, ethics, principles, motivation, conduct. Invest at least 20% leading those with authority over you and 15% leading your peers. So, you can break down anything in percentages. I don't think he necessarily maybe meant exactly all that, but the very first point that he is bringing up, I believe, is in line with what we've discussed before and several times, that it's about leading yourself, and that comes down to building certain levels of self-awareness, right? So what is your reaction to some other points in that quote, and specifically is the investing some percentage, he's saying 20%, leading those with authority over you. How is it working now in the times of COVID?
Well, you're seeing the social stress that's happening across the world, whether you wear a mask or you don't wear a mask, whether you keep 1.5 meters or 2 meters, 6 feet apart, whether there's mass gatherings or not mass gatherings, whether you go to school or you don't go to school. You're seeing that the clash and the contention has come to a standstill. It's like people have just stopped listening to each other, giving time to people with authority above you to lead them. We do that. That's in the elections, in any elections. Whether it's fair or rigged, you still get to vote, right? And then the people have then demonstrated even if you were a tyrant, right? If there was a one-party system and you exercise your vote, people outside the system obviously will say, well, how fair can it be? Was you only voting for the same party? But that individual within that system has already had the chance to voice what they wanted to say. Right? Okay. So the thing is, leading the people that have authority in you is where the democratic principles come in. That's where you lead, is through your voting. When your self-awareness expands, your sensitivity expands, your sense of ownership expands, then that means your sense of responsibility also expands. When that sense of responsibility is so strong within you, then your actions are also very strong. Your actions to enact change to the future that you want becomes much stronger. Right? But whether the future will come out to what you want, you don't know. But once you've given it all your best, if it happens or it doesn't happen, you can still walk away from it because you've given your best. As you move into these self-reflective practices, introspective practices, and a lot of high-performing leaders do this, that is the way of dealing with sensitivity and self-awareness, because there is so much conflict happening all the time. It's rhetorical to say it's a very personal journey, but once you understand or you begin to see what is the purpose of leadership on a higher level? And that is the upliftment of people. Upliftment of people, whether it's in a community or whether it's within a small business, you're uplifting individuals so they reach their potential. Once they reach the potential, will they not contribute back to the bottom line of your business? Right? If you uplift people around the neighborhood, you bring up the neighborhood, the place will be much better. Then isn't everyone in a better mindset and they can go around and do the things that they need to get done in order for them to feel good about themselves? Feeling good about themselves, they feel that they're more empowered. Once they're empowered, more creativity, more innovation, growth for everyone. We progress as humanity, as civilization. Perhaps that when we start taking our system for granted, things begin to fall apart. So it comes again, we circle around this, that feeling of gratitude is important. Even as a leader, you must feel gratitude that people have allowed you to lead them. You must feel gratitude that you're in that position because whatever you've done in your life, you've got to that position. So be grateful to the people that supported you and the people who didn't support you.
I wanted to talk about abuse of power in leadership. My experience of rape and the excuse of the power of the abuser to completely change me in that moment, completely squash me as a being in that moment, and me keeping to fight and me keeping to say, hey, you have a power, just like the leader would be. I mean, I understand it's hard for people to connect it. Having power over others and having choices in your own life share a critical foundation, like control. According to a study that was published a while back in Psychological Science, a journal of Association of Psychological Science, in the paper found that people were willing to trade one source of control for another. So just for example, if people lack power, they clamor for choice. And if they have an abundance of choice, they don't strive as much for power. So in my case, I had no control over my situation, or at least my abuser thought I had no control over that situation. But I chose, it's all about choice. I chose to fight for my life and I chose to make something out of it. So where I am now, whether it's from the leadership perspective or from mom perspective, whatever role I take is really a direct result of the choices that I've made then. So it was a critical moment of transition for me. And no matter how, I suppose, painful that is, even right now where our society is, I have high level or sense of self-awareness. I experience more pain because I put more attention on those who are struggling with living life to the fullest potential. I know it sounds like a cliche, but I truly believe in that. And I'm going to use yet another quote. I totally love it. Dr. Dacher Keltner, he did a lot of research on psychological research on the power of leadership. And he said, as a leader, you need to remember your capacity to alter the state of others depends on their trust in you. Your ability to empower others depends on their willingness to be influenced by you. Your power is constructed in the judgments and actions of others. When they grant you power, they increase your ability to make their lives better or worse. So to me, I guess I am in alignment when you're saying it's all about uplifting others' lives. So after I experienced certain negative circumstances in my life, I made a choice to actually help others by learning how to be a leader. There were some natural abilities, there were circumstances, and there's also something that I developed over time. I always wanted to help people. So that resonated with me when you talked about it. You also talked about choices. That's super important. It's the choice to impact others positively. That matters to me a lot. And what I see a lot, Tim, and whether it's in the political sphere or within the organizations, how poor of choices individuals make, how poor of choices leaders make by not taking care of their own mental state, well-being.
And I like and appreciate how you regularly go back to the choice. It's the choices we make. A great leader from a leader is the choices that are made. And the choices that are made, of you could go this way, it's either this or it's either that. I mean, that is the choice. And coming out of like the phoenix rising from the fire, right? It is from one's own misery, one's own failure, where you have a choice. You can have a choice of perpetuating that misery or that suffering, which means it's driven from anger and revenge. Or you have the other choice of this doesn't have to be like this, right?
Yep.
And that choice of walking, way of bringing other people along with you, So these choices is also the choices you make for yourself. I can continue on the path that I want to go on, or I'll make the choice and make the difference. And I'm not saying that it's an easy thing to do. I mean, there are situations where people do not have the choice, and it's been very well documented. When you start looking at rough sleepers or people living in abject poverty and still being able to have a life and what they go through, you're able to then see that regardless of them not being able to break out of the system, they have still made the choice to fight it. And unfortunately, they haven't seen that. That is the first step to emancipation, first step of liberation, is that I will still get up. There was a series of documentary on Al Jazeera International on the Filipino slums. And they were following families of how they made their living. I mean, literally there was nothing. And it was heartbreaking, and just things that you saw of them trying to survive in the conditions that they have. And, you learn about this in society and culture, just on how the system perpetuates itself. And I mean, there's all sorts of arguments for it. But the human side of it is you're able to also see the resilience of the human spirit, which makes it even more inspirational in a very weird way, that, wow, that is resilience. And so that is leadership as well.
Yeah.
That purpose of upliftment.
We've talked about the fact that it's not about a title. So becoming a leader is not as simple as having a title that's awarded to a person, even if you've worked tirelessly to learn, let's say in college, or 2 classes offered by your employer that taught you every possible strategy for becoming a great influencer. There's really no book or course out there that can prepare you fully for real life as a leader and actual life scenarios that are filled with challenges and success of perseverance, teach us lessons, and lead to discoveries that are not taught by academia. And the biggest lesson in leadership is the choice we make at one point or another in life that help us see and believe in the power of humility. Only when we have this realization that while leading, we are empowered to impact the course of someone's life, and only then should we allow ourselves to be called leaders. And with this knowledge, we are powerful, and this power can either create beauty or obliteration. So yes, the choice is really ours, how we liberate ourselves and actually provide whatever possible experience to uplift the spirits of individuals that we're leading, and to again bring results, because leadership does include the the part where we cannot always think with our heart. We need to think how to deliver results, the financial results, but that probably is more management.
Yeah, it's also saying that leadership itself isn't a destination, but it's actually a vehicle for change.
You're right. I like the way you say it. Well, thank you, Tim. I look forward to our next episode. If you enjoyed our discussion, please like and comment below. Subscribe to our channel, The Third Side of the Coin, on YouTube. To learn more about executive leadership and career coaching, resume writing, organizational development services, go to excaliburcoaching.com.